If you're a founder of a scaling startup and you have this feeling that the bigger your company gets, the more often you feel stuck somewhere in between chaos and structure, between vision and execution, between I can still handle this and this simply can't go on, then I have something for you. My name is Agnieszka Jurczyk. I work with founders at inflection points. I've spent years inside scaling tech companies as COO, interim group CFO, and at board level, representing their lead investor. That experience, both from the operator side and the investor side of the table, is what the series is built on. I come in at moments when a company has grown faster than the way it's being run, when old methods stop working, and there's no time to learn new ones. The Founder to Zero series is about how to move from constant firefighting mode to building your company as a system. One that can actually scale. One that stops depending entirely on the founder, but doesn't spin out of control. And doesn't turn your startup into a stiff, slow-moving corporation. Let's go, shall we? It's 4 in the morning. The office smells like cold pizza and coffee that stopped working hours ago. The only sound is the frantic tapping of a keyboard. The same bug that was supposed to be fixed is back, of course. And of course it's back with him. It's yet another bug that Peter is patching himself, on fumes. There's no point going home. He's too tired to drive. And besides, what for? Peter drags 2 beanbags from the conference room into his office, lines them up side by side, and lies down on them like on a makeshift bed. It's not comfortable, but it will do. It has to. Peter glances at his phone. 5:10, and he's still not asleep. Thoughts racing. Anger at the team mixes with a sense of complete helplessness. They get paid fairly, but when something breaks, they go home, and he ends up alone, in the middle of the night, neck deep in code. Peter hasn't had a proper holiday in 4 years. Not because he didn't want to. It's just that the moment he sleeps in, the world starts falling apart. A week offline sounds like science fiction. And somewhere in the middle of all this, a thought surfaces. One that his whole body is fighting to silence. That he's losing control. That he can't keep this up. That one day everyone will see that he's not really a founder. Just someone who got lucky. And that luck is running out. Peter misses the early days. It was only a few years ago, but it feels like another lifetime. Back then, everything was simpler. Meetings were fun, not a constant source of stress. People were pulling in the same direction, not fighting those endless turf wars over nonsense. The new hires just don't get it. The old guard keeps saying it used to be different. And Peter sees it. It was different. Now investors are pushing, asking for numbers, questioning forecasts, and all he ever hears from his team is, it depends. And of course, it's always him who has to figure out what it depends on. Peter knows his company is in chaos. He knows that he needs to fix it. He just doesn't have a moment to figure out how. Because in order to fix the chaos, he'd have to get out of this firefighting mode. But how if those fires won't put themselves out on their own? Week by week, there are more and more of them. And Peter No time to think. No time to build strategy. No time to create. What used to drive him is now just a distant memory. Now Peter has the sense that instead of building something, he's just running circles around what he's already built and holding it together on sheer willpower. Because if he were to let go, everything would collapse immediately. The business is growing. Revenue is going up. People are getting better and better. So it should be getting easier, right? It's not getting easier. The further in, the more complicated it gets. And that terrifies him. Peter lies on those beanbags, stares at the ceiling, and the same thought keeps coming back. Again and again, boomerang style, louder each time. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just not good enough to figure it out. But it could be different. Picture the same office at 4 in the morning. Same smell of cold pizza and coffee. Same tapping of a keyboard. Peter is at his computer again, but this time not because he has to. Not because something's on fire again. Not because if he lets go, everything will fall apart. He's here because today, thinking came easy. For the first time in weeks, he was genuinely in flow. He wasn't patching bugs that never should have reached him. He wasn't putting out other people's fires. He wasn't making fumbling decisions on things that have to go through the founder anyway. Peter was creating, connecting dots, making sense of things, and he didn't even notice when it turned 4. This is not a return to the good old days. The company is much bigger. The stakes are much higher. The pressure to grow hasn't disappeared. Quite the opposite. But something else came back. Energy, sense of purpose, balance. Peter sits down to work because he wants to, not because if he doesn't, everything will collapse. He feels again that he knows where he's going. He knows what his job is and what it isn't anymore. He no longer has to hold the company together by sheer force of will. It's not perfect. Problems still happen. Sometimes even a fire lands on his desk at the 11th hour. But it's good enough to have space for strategic thinking, for creating, for recharging. And that's exactly what the Founder to Zero series is about. It's about how to move step by step from barely holding on to a mode where your company starts working for you, not the other way around. Before we go further, a quick ask. If what I'm talking about here resonates with where you are right now and you'd like to hear more, hit subscribe. A thumbs up on this video would also mean a lot. In return, I'll keep making more content about how to scale a business without losing your mind along the way. Thank you for every bit of support. Founder to Zero is not a series about magic tricks. You won't find 10 life hacks that will transform your company in 30 days here. What you also won't find here is the kind of LinkedIn wisdom that sounds great in a post, but in the real life of a founder often leads to even more chaos. This is not a series for people who would like to work less without changing anything. Delegate everything and simply disappear. Nor is it for those who want to hear that growing fast can be painless, tensionless, and free of difficult decisions. I'm not going to promise you that once you've watched all the episodes, your company will suddenly feel as light as a feather, and you will become a walking ad for work-life balance. No, that simply wouldn't be honest. Founder to Zero is not a management course either. We won't be talking theory, corporate frameworks, or the perfect org charts from MBA textbooks, whose assumptions have little to do with the reality that a founder of a scaling startup actually faces. This isn't a series of motivational speeches either, nor is it mindset coaching, where you'd only hear that it's enough to change your attitude. You probably already know it's not enough. And so do I. It's also not a roadmap for going back to the way things were at the beginning, because companies that scale fast don't do it by returning to how things were at the start. What you will find in Founder to Zero is a serious dose of practice, drawn from years of working with startups at very different stages of development. From pre-seed teams made up of founders only to a company that became a global number 2 in its market. A company I first knew when the whole team fit in one room, and which just a few years later I sat on the board of as its lead investor's representative, approving ESOPs and M&A transactions worth serious money. Experience both from the operator and investor side of the table. Founder to Zero is a series about the founder's reality, about moments of transition, about tensions that can't be bypassed but can be navigated more wisely. It's 10 episodes in which I'll walk you through 10 pillars of effective scaling, the ones that separate startups that made it to the top from those that didn't. Founder to Zero is a series about an upgrade, about the moment when what worked perfectly at the start suddenly stops working. Not because it was wrong, but because in the meantime, your company has moved to a completely different place. It's a series about how to stop carrying your startup on your own founder's shoulders, on willpower, heroism, and superhuman sacrifice. It's about building a system that can hold an ever-growing scale without breaking people along the way. And most of all, without breaking you. It's a series about what it takes to keep your ambitions intact and still have time and space for what actually matters. It's a series for founders who want to grow consciously, without illusions, without corporate bureaucracy, and without burning out along the way. Founder to Zero is not a loose collection of random topics. It's a deliberately built sequence of steps that will let you gradually move to a completely different level of startup management. We will start where most problems actually begin, even though it's rarely said out loud. With you under pressure. That's why, in the first episode, I'll talk about how to make better decisions when you have far too many to make. Because before you can start fixing the chaos, you need to have space to do it. We'll cover how constant firefighting mode affects your capacity to make the right calls, and how just a few simple lessons borrowed from people who fight actual fires can help you regain control before chaos takes over. In the second episode, we'll focus on your role as founder and CEO. I'll talk about why and how company growth changes that role, and what happens when a founder resists that change for too long and keeps acting like it's still day one. This is also the episode where we'll bring to light a very important and often unacknowledged dilemma, and we'll try to face it directly. The third episode is about delegation. I'll explain why at a certain stage of startup growth, delegation starts to break down, and how to get your time back without losing the influence over the direction your company is heading. In the fourth episode, we'll look closely at the topic of accountability. I'll show you, through a specific example, how to structure accountability so people act proactively instead of waiting to be pinged. And how to do this without accountability becoming just another word for finding someone to blame. Episode 5 is about leadership communication. We'll talk about how to have genuinely difficult conversations without losing your team's trust or your credibility as a leader, but consistently building both. We'll also dismantle the most common mistakes that lead many leaders off the intended course. And a myth that has cost more than a few people dearly, even when they meant well. In episode 6, we'll deal with something that keeps many founders awake at night: Team conflict. I'll explain why conflicts usually don't come from emotions or personality clashes. We'll look at the most common sources of misalignment in startup teams and talk about how to prevent them by building an environment where disagreement stops becoming a turf war and starts being genuinely constructive. Episode 7 is about startup culture. I know how precious it is and how easily it can slip away. So in this episode, we'll take a look at what startup culture actually is, what it definitely isn't, and how to make sure that scaling and the changes that it inevitably brings don't kill the energy that attracts people to work in startups. In episode 8, we'll talk about MVP, but not in the way you may think. This time, we'll apply that approach not to a product, but to something that makes many founders want to run for the hills. Processes. We'll talk about creating frameworks that let you stop answering the same questions over and over again. Not in a corporate style, though, in the style that a scaling startup actually needs. MVP. Episode 9 is about finance. But I'm not going to talk about spreadsheets or bookkeeping because from a founder's perspective, that's not really the point. We'll look at finance from altitude. I'll explain why finance and accounting are not the same thing and what to do and in what order so that finance stops feeling like a painful reporting obligation and actually starts supporting strategic decision making. In episode 10, we'll deal with investor conversations, not only when raising funding. We'll look at the startup world through the eyes of an investment fund. I'll talk about what's worth understanding to be able to have those conversations as a partner, not as someone asking for a favor. And finally, the closing episode of Founder to Zero. We'll tie it all together into one coherent whole. I'll share a roadmap that will let you move through this change effectively, without burning out along the way. In every episode, you'll find a story drawn from real life. But I won't be telling you exact stories of people that I've worked with. It won't be about them personally either. The characters and their companies are all fictional. But each of these stories is inspired by events that actually happened, even if the context may have been somewhat different. Every episode will also include a short challenge for you, which, if you want to do it, of course, will let you apply what I talk about in practice, in your own company. Some may even help you see your business from a new angle. So if you feel that your company is growing too fast to keep up, if you can see that something is going sideways, but you can't quite name it yet, or if you're just exhausted with your startup reality looking the way it does, then stay with me. Fair warning though, this is not a series to have on in the background. This is a roadmap for founders who feel they've reached the moment where they can't keep running on the same engine and want to upgrade it before it ceases. So this material definitely rewards active listening. It's also not a series for a weekend binge watch. As they say, one step at a time. One episode, one reflection. And I genuinely encourage you to sit with it for a while. Because from experience, I can tell you that some things, before they really start working, just need a little time to settle. So you don't need to be ready for everything at once. You don't need to change everything in one day. You may know the words of Lao Tzu. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And that first step can be the first episode of Founder to Zero. In the next episode of Founder to Zero, we'll talk about something that's almost a daily reality in growing startups. Firefighting mode. I'll explain why pressure is a terrible advisor and how to break free from it and regain control. And if you already feel that this is exactly the moment to start preparing your business for effective scaling, and you'd like to talk confidentially, one-on-one, about how to make it stop depending on your sleepless nights, you'll find a contact link below this video. That's it for today. Take care and see you soon.